Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Gold, as you all know. And I welcome to Corporate Radio and Television Station where they giving a back-to-back as the hot, as the suburb. It don't sell again, it don't happen as it happen for this Obodo Nigeria. How this TINUBU cabinet take they finish our money for this country. And Sanwolu don't start to, you know, say God no go ever give birth to sheep. Lila, you know, they sell it. When God get the belly, he go born the goat, you know, they get sheep. And when the sheep get the belly, you know, go born goat. All of us know, say, Sanwolu now the son, or we go say, second in command, a boy to TINUBU, a father in politics. Don't chop Lagos to the extent Lagos don't they shake leggy. Their revenue don't they metete. It don't they shake oh. It don't come to our ear and say someone who self don't talk your own say no be in the chop all the money oh. So all the money when they approve for the vegetable, imagine 44 million naira to buy vegetable for TINUBU. My people, no, they don't finish us for this country. Now, someone who don't start his own, it don't they chop legacy. It don't they chop Lagos money, their revenue every. It don't they use our suburb itself. Oh, see the analysis.
Million views, so it went viral over the weekend. Everyone's been talking about it. Now, this isn't the first time that you are writing to Lagos State. So, why do you think this caught fire the way it did?
So it's interesting, and it's not always easy to understand what resonates with folks. But I think I would highlight in this case maybe three things. I would say first is that it touched a raw nerve, right? So people are in a very difficult place economically. They are being asked to make all sorts of sacrifices that maybe they have not had to make before. And they're daily being enjoined to, bear with the current circumstances and that things will get better and so on. So it seems jarring when they are faced with, things that look like evidence of non-judicious use of expenditure by the leaders. I think the second thing is that, it is very specific, because this is information. Generally we talk about, non-judicious use of funds, and it's like a general thing. But here people are presented with very specific information about specific, contract awards and things that they can relate to and they can touch. They are relatable. So it's interesting that, some of the things that have generated the most comment are not even the numbers that are sort of in the big billions, but just numbers that when you look at the amount, it may just be a few million, but when you look at it in relation to the item, people can easily relate and say, this...
Like the 7 million for diffusers, fragrances.
Yeah. So, what can we say? And then, finally, I think people they get involved, right? So some people have gotten in there, gone to the website and tried to get more information on themselves, and even come up with things that, are not part of what we did, because we focused on just the second quarter and the third quarter, and people have gone and looked more broadly and identified, for example, that, the state paid for legal expenses for the governor in supporting in defending a political case and so on and so forth. So things that we didn't touch on have sort of come out in the discourse. So I think that engagement is also feeding some of this.
What do you make? I mean, as you mentioned, there's a procurement website where everyone can see this. These are basic things, but Dr. Abati was saying on the morning show this morning that since some of these things are basic but they're not done. There's a window to commend the states. Budget ranked Lagos 14th as far as fiscal transparency is concerned. Lagos didn't make the top 10. What do you make of that? Is that a basic thing that you should not be commending a state for putting this information on your website?
Look, I would say, maybe yes and no, right? And why do I say that? Yes, you can say, well, maybe not all states are doing it and Lagos is doing it and therefore you might commend them. But let's not forget that this is in pursuance of or pursuant to a law, actually, the Public Procurement Agency law. And that law actually requires that significant government contracts be published, right? So, in effect, government is complying with its own law. So, should we commend the government for being law-abiding? Maybe. But what does that say about our expectations of government? You are now expected to be law-abiding. The people don't come and commend us for being law-abiding every day, right? So in that sense, I think part of the issue is that we have come to have very low expectations, right? And things that are our rights, we are seeing them as privileges. And in that sense, we as, the governed are contributing to the problem.
Look, there's too much of this to go through. I just wanted to get some of your thoughts because you dug up so much. The consultancy fees, for instance, like I think it's AEC is one of the companies you mentioned. There are a lot of other consultancy fees there to the tune of billions. The bulletproof Lexus for 470 million, the governor's BMW motorcycle convoys, 14 of them, 36 million, a swimming pool for the deputy governor in his residence for 10 million. What would you want to hear from the Lagos state government as far as, because I know your notes specifically said more transparency, more details, some of them should be, as we see all these figures, what do you want to hear from the state? Because we've extended an invitation for them to respond. Yeah.
All right. So, I think for me, and it's not just about me, I think, they need to explain to the people. When you see the comments, it's not as if we manufactured any information or this is just basic data that we put out. And when you look at the reaction of the people, any responsible government will know that it has touched a nerve and needs to respond to the people. And where there's need for explanation, where there's need for justification. But more importantly, I think a couple of things. One is that there should be improvements and it should be a continuous improvement exercise anyway, but there should be improvements in the procurement process. One of the points which I made, and you alluded to the fact that I had written on procurement before. I wrote on that pursuant to a letter which I had written at the time of the mass burial.
Yes.
And I said that in that letter that was leaked revealed certain things about the procurement process. And I wrote a follow-up letter to say that the procurement agency gets an admin fee on each of the procurements, and that was a conflict of interest and would affect their independence and their objectivity. And I think there's some evidence of that in some of what we are seeing. So I think that it's important that these structural things which create incentives for people not to do the right thing are removed, right? And ultimately, what I expect the government to do is to make the right decisions, judicious use of public funds, always in the public interest, and to govern in the interest of the people. And in the long run, the fruits of those actions will be revealed in the lives of the people.
I want to ask you about cost of living in Lagos State. If you look at the latest inflation figures, it's above the nation, right? I was talking about this with someone, and the pushback I got was, well, it's the commercial capital. If you look at a New York or a London or a Accra, well, what's your? Should we expect that cost of living should be this high, or can it be brought down?
Well, so that the cost of living is higher in a capital city or a financial center than the rest of a nation is not an unusual circumstance. And, if we had a situation where, for example, cost of living in Lagos was marginally higher than cost of living in Ibadan, for example, but the average person could have a reasonable standard of living, I don't think anybody would be complaining.
Okay.
Right? I think the issue is that because of the actions and inactions and the outcome of governance over the years, we are in a situation today where people's standards of living, rather than going up, are actually declining. And even when you measure over an extended period, as long as a generation, which is 30 years, many people will tell you that they are much worse off today than they were 30 years ago. That we may have taller buildings, we may have a few bridges that we didn't have or whatever, but that people's quality of life, standard of living, right, the things that they can afford comfortably, the healthcare, the education, that those are materially worse than what they could enjoy 30 years ago. And I think that this is the problem that people have. So it's not so much the relative cost. Yes, the cost of living in Lagos will be higher. But I will also make the point that what it does is to raise the bar for whoever is governing a city like Lagos. You have to realize that to whom much is given, much is expected. And that Lagos being a commercial capital, being a nerve center, generating trade, income, and taxes almost on its own steam, brings with it a responsibility of government to manage those things well. Because if government manages those things well, then these additional costs, the effects of it on the average person can be ameliorated. If they have decent means of public transportation across the state, if they have healthcare systems that are reasonable, that they can access, educational systems that they don't have to pay an arm and a leg to get in the private sector, these are the things that a responsible, effective, high-performing government in a city like Lagos delivers for its citizens. So that even as the cost of living is higher here, because it's an inclusive society, people's capacity to sustain themselves and their families are also higher, and therefore they can live good standards of living.
What you've been commended for this what you've brought out. Gbadebo Rhodes-Vivour, who of course is the candidate for the Labour Party, he of course brought to light on the tweets that the legal issues, the using of government money for the defending of the governor in court and everything with all the election thing. What do you make of maintaining a healthy opposition in a state like Lagos post-election?
Well, I think it is critical. I think it is. You see, democracy will only produce the positive outcome. Democracy, by the way, we should know, is not synonymous with good outcomes for the people. It is in how you operate the democracy that will determine whether you get good outcomes or poor outcomes. And as we look across Africa, we don't see a shortage of democracies, but we see a shortage of outcomes. And so one of the critical levers for whether you get good outcomes or poor outcomes from democracy is the quality of the opposition, right? And the ability to have an opposition that engages the government. And part of the problem that we have in Nigeria is that, in Nigerian politics, is that when we have elections, somebody emerges, others don't. People go to court to challenge, and that's good and fair. And people should, if they believe that they have a mandate that's been stolen. But typically what you then see is that when that does not succeed, right, people lose interest, right, because the prize is no longer there. But the act of opposition, the act of diligent engagement of the government, reasoned, not emotional, or, emotional is good, but it cannot be purely emotional. Those things are critical and important because that way you hold the government to account. That way, whoever is in the seat cannot have a free hand. And you are, in effect, adding value to things. And, from the perspective of an opposition politician, it also gives people an opportunity to see what you stand for and who you are and how you think and what your values are and so on and so forth. So it enriches the system, it makes it more robust, and ultimately leads us to a situation where, these so-called dividends of democracy come within reach.
Oh, my people, you don't hear them, you don't see them. This is how they take finish our money. And the poor masses, ordinary one mudu of gari, they don't get it. Money to buy one mudu of rice, and somebody go sit down to just buy vegetable. 44 million. Oh, God, we ask them. No wonder the Agbadon herself don't they hear them. They don't they support for their head. Now then they cry pass. Now when you support bad thing self go follow you metete. I don't talk my own, no, and I don't put you company. Bye.